Welcome back to Next Level Ed Leadership Interview Prep. In our last episode, we discovered that executive trust isn't built by repeating leadership language. It's built when school boards repeatedly observe your executive thinking. But as I continued comparing superintendent interviews, I noticed something interesting. Trust alone didn't fully explain why certain finalists consistently separated themselves from the rest of the field. Every finalist in the final round had earned enough trust to still be standing. They were qualified and had significant leadership experience, but one candidate eventually became the superintendent. Obviously, the next question is why. The answer wasn't found in a single interview question or a stronger resume, and it wasn't simply because of better communication skills. Instead, the transcripts suggested something a little bit more subtle. At some point during an interview, boards appear to stop evaluating the candidate sitting across the table and begin imagining that candidate leading their district. When you get to this point, this is a different evaluation. Most superintendent candidates prepare for interview questions. School boards are evaluating something else. I'm Jonathan Royce. Through Executive Interview Intelligence, each episode explores the leadership signals, decision-making patterns, and executive behaviors that influence superintendent hiring decisions so you can make your executive leadership visible before the board makes its hiring decision. Recognized as one of the top 10 K-12 podcasts on Podomatic, Executive Interview Intelligence is built on the analysis of real superintendent interviews. We've now analyzed more than 150 superintendent interview questions and responses to uncover the hidden executive evaluations taking place throughout the hiring process. That way, you can focus on leveling up, accelerate your professional trajectory, and prepare for a future where you're leading a district and improving students' lives. This is Executive Interview Intelligence Research Observation number 76. Now, as I compared case study 1, 10, and 11, I wasn't looking for stronger answers. I was looking for the moment when the school board could begin imagining the candidate sitting across from them, occupying the superintendent's office. You'll find this interesting. The strongest finalist didn't answer questions in isolated events. Every answer felt connected to the previous one. And if they were in the second round, those answers connected to the previous interview. Instead of restarting with every new question, they kept building the same picture or expanding on the one they had already created. In case study 10, one finalist answered questions about literacy, budget priorities, student achievement, organizational structure, community relationships, and accountability. At the stated question level, these seem like completely different topics, but underneath each answer, the same leadership philosophy kept appearing. The candidate consistently returned to one central idea. Strong systems produce strong outcomes. It didn't matter if he was discussing literacy, central office alignment, special education, or district improvement. He repeatedly explained that every department had to move in the same direction because fragmented systems created fragmented results. You can see what happened. The candidate wasn't presenting different leadership traits, and the board wasn't collecting disconnected answers. The school board members were watching a coherent executive philosophy unfold across the course of 1.5 interviews. That same pattern appeared in case study 11. One finalist was asked about strategic planning. Another question focused on communication, then stakeholder engagement, then continuous improvement. Different questions, just like in the previous case study, but every answer returned to the same executive behaviors. Listening first, building trust, following through, creating alignment before initiating change. Again, the committee wasn't simply learning new information. They were watching the same type of leadership appear over and over again across responses. A second finalist approached those same questions differently. Different person, different types of responses. But watch this. So his answers repeatedly emphasized visibility, relationships, student voice, teacher support, community engagement, and instead of describing isolated leadership techniques, he consistently reinforced one executive identity, a superintendent who remains visible and accessible throughout the organization. Different candidate, same questions, different leadership style, we saw the same phenomena. Each answer reinforced the one before it. When I went back and I compared these interviews with case study number one, that pattern was still evident. The strongest candidates weren't introducing a new version of themselves every time another board member asked a question. They kept revealing the same executive operating system through different situations. The stories changed, the examples changed, the context changed, but the leader stayed consistent. It was remarkable. The consistency matters because school boards aren't trying to predict how you'll answer interview questions. They're trying to predict how you'll behave when you're leading their district. And predictability becomes much easier when every answer strengthens the same executive picture. When we look at the transcripts, those help explain why boards begin picturing one candidate as their next superintendent. And it wasn't because they agreed with every idea. It was because they began predicting how that person would lead. This is how one finalist in case study 10 answered a question about accountability. He didn't immediately start talking about holding employees accountable. Instead, he said this: we have to hold ourselves accountable in central office, and that starts with me. Now, that's a leadership statement. Most candidates tend to answer accountability questions by explaining how they'll evaluate other people. This candidate started with himself. Then, only after establishing executive responsibility did he discuss organizational accountability. That subtle sequence there communicates something important. It tells the board that this leader views accountability as something to be modeled before it's enforced. A few minutes later in the interview, same candidate, he reinforced the same executive identity. When asked about trust, this is what he said: you build trust based on actions, not words. You see what happened? Those two statements weren't isolated. They formed an executive pattern. Personal accountability followed by action. That combination makes it harder for a board to imagine this is probably how this person will actually. That combination, makes it easier for a board to imagine that this is probably how this person will actually lead. The same consistency appeared in case study 11. One finalist described his approach to building trust by saying, trust is earned in teaspoons and lost in buckets. A memorable phrase. But he didn't stop there. He immediately explained what that looked like in practice: showing up in the community, following through, keeping commitments, listening to stakeholders. Every example reinforced the same leadership philosophy. Another finalist in the same case study answered a communications question by saying, visibility is number one. Then he expanded on it. He explained that visibility wasn't standing on the sidelines at a football game. It meant having authentic conversations with people you don't already know. Listening to students, creating student advisory groups, using video messages so the community could understand who he was as a leader. Again, the board wasn't just hearing an answer. They were beginning to imagine what it would feel like to work with this superintendent. That became the pattern across all three case studies. The strongest finalists didn't merely answer questions, they created predictability. By the middle of the interview, the committee no longer needed to wonder, how would this person respond? The interview itself had already shown them. School boards begin picturing a candidate as their next superintendent when every answer reinforces the same executive identity. Not because the answers sound rehearsed, not because they repeat the same talking points, but because every response consistently reveals the same leadership operating system. By the end of the interview, the board isn't trying to remember individual answers. They're remembering the leader those answers consistently revealed. That's a completely different standard than simply giving a good interview. It's the difference between answering questions and making your executive leadership visible. Most superintendent candidates prepare for interview questions. School boards are evaluating something else. If you'd like to understand what your own interview responses are communicating before you walk into the boardroom, visit analysis.next-leveledleadershipinterviewprep.com and receive your complimentary decision chain analysis. If you found today's research valuable, subscribe, leave a review, and share this episode with another educational leader preparing for their next superintendent interview. Until next time, keep making your executive leadership visible before the board makes its hiring decision.